Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know what's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickeytolife.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. But today, we're taking you on a deep dive into the world of young people in Taiwan and China. And let me tell you, it's a fascinating trip.
We're talking about two groups that seem to be growing further apart, almost like they're living in parallel universes. On one side, you've got natural independence taking root in Taiwan. On the other, there's the burning passion of China's little pinks.
Okay, natural independence. That sounds intriguing. What exactly are we talking about here?
Well, imagine growing up in a place where democracy is just. The air you breathe, you've never known anything else. That's the reality for many young people in Taiwan. This scholar, Lin Zhuoshui, he coined the term natural independence to describe them.
So it's like independence is just their default setting. They don't even question it.
Exactly. They didn't live through the authoritarian days of the Kuomintang or get bombarded with China identity messaging like older generations. For them, Taiwan being a separate country is just natural.
And the numbers actually back this up. The Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation did a poll in 2023. And over half of Taiwanese people, 54.5% to be exact, were all about keeping the status quo, basically. Let's just keep things as they are. Another quarter actually favored full-on independence.
That's a pretty strong statement right there. And on the flip side, only a tiny sliver, like 11.9%, supported unification with China. It paints a pretty clear picture, don't you think?
It totally does. And get this. Research from Taiwanese identity studies shows that the number of young folks who identify as Taiwanese rather than Chinese has gone through the roof. We're talking a jump from 40% in 2000 to a whopping 67% in 2023. That's a massive shift.
It's like if Taiwan was a person, they'd be saying, look, I've got my own place, my own job, my own way of doing things. I've never lived with China, so why are we even talking about breaking up or getting together?
I love that analogy. And let's not forget, Taiwan got all the bells and whistles of an independent nation. Their own constitution, a military, their own money, the new Taiwan dollar. It's like checking off all the boxes on the statehood checklist.
Even the Kuomintang, which has historically been all about unification, seems to be reading the room. They've chilled out on that stance and are now focusing on keeping the status quo, especially heading into the 2024 elections.
Okay, so we've got Taiwan vibing in their own lane, but then we've got the little pinks on the other side of the strait. Tell me more about them. What makes them tick?
Wow. This term Little Pinks, it actually came from this online forum called Xinjiang Literature City. It's become the label for a whole generation of young people in China who are super patriotic, almost to the point of like overflowing passion. You'll see them online leaving comments like, Taiwan belongs to China, end of story, and will fight anyone who says otherwise.
Wow, that's intense. Where does that kind of fiery nationalism come from?
It's important to understand that these young people have grown up immersed in a very specific version of history. The official education system and the media in China paint a picture where Taiwan has always been a part of their country.
But wait, isn't that different from what they teach in Taiwan? I thought Taiwan sees itself as never having been ruled by the People's Republic of China.
You're right, it's a completely different narrative. While Taiwan focuses on its separate development, China's textbooks claim Taiwan has been under their control since. Get this. The Qin and Han dynasties, we're talking way back to 221 BC.
Whoa, that's going way, way back. So they're basically saying Taiwan has always been theirs.
Exactly. And for them, the 1895 Japanese takeover of Taiwan was a major national humiliation. Then when Japan gave up control in 1945, they saw it as Taiwan rightfully returning to China. That's the story that's deeply ingrained in their understanding of history.
It's almost like two completely different movies playing in their heads. And to make sure everyone's on the same page, China even passed this law back in 2005 called the Anti-Secession Law. It basically says Taiwan is part of China, period. And if you think otherwise, you're wrong.
It's a pretty clear message, right? So you can see how for Little Pinks, Taiwan's like a family member who ran away from home but will eventually come back. They believe it's a matter of time, a matter of those blood ties, the historical connection, drawing them back together.
Even if Taiwan's currently hanging out with someone else, like say the U.S.
Exactly. They see it as a temporary phase, a youthful rebellion that will eventually be overcome by the strong pull of history and shared heritage. It's like they're convinced that Taiwan just needs a little nudge in the right direction to remember where they truly belong. And to back up their claim, they often bring up UN Resolution 2758 from way back in 1971.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that one. Doesn't it basically say that the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate China?
That's the gist of it, yeah. And China loves to whip out this resolution as proof that Taiwan falls under their jurisdiction, like it's some kind of international stamp of approval.
But hold on a sec. I've also heard that this resolution doesn't actually say anything specific about Taiwan's legal status. It's more about which government gets to represent China at the UN, right?
You're absolutely right. It's a bit of a legal gray area, and China tends to interpret it in a way that supports their claims. But the truth is, lots of countries and organizations still interact with Taiwan using its own name, recognizing its government as separate from China's.
It's like everyone's politely ignoring the elephant in the room, pretending they don't see Taiwan running its own show, with a passport that gets you into over 170 countries without a visa. They've got all these diplomatic connections. It's hard to deny they're doing their own thing.
It definitely muddies the waters, that's for sure. And then, of course, there's the not-so-subtle pressure China puts on Taiwan. The military drills, the economic maneuvering. It's like they're constantly trying to flex their muscles and remind everyone who's boss.
Right, like those joint sword exercises they did in 2024. It's a pretty clear message, like, hey, Taiwan, don't you forget who you belong to. But honestly, I'm not sure that kind of tough love approach is winning them any fans.
In fact, it seems to be pushing Taiwan further away. It's like a clingy ex who keeps showing up at your door uninvited, demanding you take them back. Not exactly a recipe for rekindling the romance, is it?
No kidding. All that military posturing, the economic threats like the pineapple ban, the attempts to isolate Taiwan diplomatically, it's going to feel pretty suffocating over there. Like, back off, dude. I need some space.
And that sentiment is definitely reflected in the numbers. Remember that 2023 poll we mentioned? Well, it also showed that the overall favorability towards China among Taiwanese people is at an all-time low. We're talking around 20%. It's like they're saying, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, not exactly a ringing endorsement, and it seems like the younger generation is leading the charge on that one. They're just not buying what China's selling. And I've got to wonder, is it just the politics, or is there something else going on?
That's a great question. You see, there's also this whole issue of China's image problem on the international stage. There have been all these incidents with Chinese tourists behaving badly, throwing tantrums, cutting lines, being super loud and disruptive in public. It's like there's this stereotype forming, and it's not a flattering one.
Oh, yeah. I've seen those videos online. Like that one from a few years back where a bunch of Chinese tourists went crazy at a Thai airport because their flight was delayed. It was all over the news.
And remember that one in Japan where they were piling their plates sky high at a buffet? It's the kind of stuff that goes viral and shapes people's perceptions, whether we like it or not.
Those kinds of stories tend to stick in people's minds. I've heard Taiwanese people talking about similar experiences, like tour groups being disruptive at Taipei 101 or on the MRT. It creates this sense of us versus them, which doesn't exactly help bridge the gap.
Especially because Taiwanese society, with its strong Japanese influence, really emphasizes courtesy and respect for others, things like speaking softly in public, queuing up properly, being mindful of your surroundings. It's all very ingrained in their culture.
So when they see behavior that clashes with those values, it reinforces this idea that Taiwan and China are just worlds apart.
Right. It's like they're looking at each other through these cultural lenses that distort the view, making it hard to see eye to eye. And it's not just about manners either. There are some fundamental differences in values, especially when it comes to things like democracy and freedom.
Taiwan has really embraced its democratic system. They cherish their freedom of speech, human rights, diversity of thought. It's all part of their identity.
Meanwhile, China still operates under a one-party system, with heavy censorship and control over what people can say and do. Remember the 2019 crackdown on human rights lawyers? It's a stark reminder of the limits on freedom in China.
And let's not forget about same-sex marriage. Taiwan legalized it back in 2019. While it's still a taboo topic in China, it really highlights how different their social values are.
It's like they're moving in opposite directions on the social progress spectrum. And then there's the whole issue of trust. In Taiwan, there's a generally high level of social trust. People tend to believe that others will do the right thing.
But in China, there have been so many scandals, like that 2018 vaccine scandal where faulty vaccines were given to children, or the repeated food safety scares like the melamine-tainted milk powder. It's enough to make anyone skeptical.
Those incidents really eroded trust and raised serious questions about ethical standards. It's like, how can you feel comfortable with a system that doesn't seem to prioritize the well-being of its people?
So it's not just about politics. It's about a whole different way of life, a different set of values, a different level of trust. It's like trying to mix oil and water. They just don't blend.
And that brings us back to the growing resentment we're seeing in Taiwan. It's this complex cocktail of political pressure, cultural differences, and clashing moral values that's driving them further away from China. It's like they're saying, we might be neighbors, but we're definitely not on the same page.
It's kind of mind-blowing, you know, when you think about it. These two groups of young people living so close, yet feeling like they're worlds apart.
Yeah.
Makes you realize that. Behind all the political jargon and the news headlines, there are real people with real lives and hopes for the future.
Exactly, and those hopes and dreams might look very different depending on what side of the strait you're on. We talk about natural independence and little pinks, but maybe those labels are just too simplistic.
Yeah. It's not about picking sides or anything. It's more about understanding each group, where they're coming from, what's shaped their worldview.
Yeah, for sure.
Easy to fall into that us versus them, especially with all this history and political tension. But what if we could step back from those labels?
Yeah.
And just talk to each other, maybe find some common ground.
Right.
And build bridges instead of walls.
I love that. Building bridges instead of walls. We could use a lot more of that.
So to all you listeners out there, we encourage you to check out the sources we used for this deep dive and do some exploring of your own. Read different perspectives, challenge your own assumptions, maybe even connect with people who see things a little differently than you do.
You might be surprised by what you learn.
Who knows? Maybe those conversations can help us create a more peaceful and understanding world.
Cheers to that.
Cheers. And that's a wrap on this episode of Sip and Talk. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating and complex world of young people in Taiwan and China. Until next time, keep sipping that knowledge and keep those conversations flowing.